Thousands of Bonnie Tyler fans lined the streets of Swansea as her coffin made its slow, solemn journey back to the home she loved, marking the beginning of a final farewell that has left an entire nation in quiet mourning. For weeks, the world had been coming to terms with the loss of the woman whose raspy, unmistakable voice once soared through stadiums and radios across the globe. And now, on a Saturday in August, that grief finally spilled out onto the streets of Mumbles, where her fans gathered not as strangers but as one heartbroken family united by the songs that had shaped their lives. The procession began at William Presty Funeral Care, winding its way along Newton Road toward her home in El Windrua, and as the hearse approached, something remarkable happened. The crowd, many of them holding back tears, began to sing. Total Eclipse of the Heart, the song that had defined an era and made Bonnie Tyler a household name, rose from the gathered mourners, their voices trembling but determined, as if trying to send her home the way she had always sent them soaring on stage decades earlier. It was a moment that captured everything Bonnie Tyler had meant to her fans, not just a singer, but a piece of their own lives, their own memories, their own heartbreaks and celebrations set to the soundtrack of her music. Some of those standing along the road that day had traveled extraordinary distances just to be there, refusing to let geography stand between them and one last chance to say goodbye. Mother and son had flown in from Berlin, Germany, having once held tickets to see Tyler perform live in November, a concert that would now never happen. The son later spoke about how special it felt to share this moment with his mother, a devoted fan who had passed her love of Tyler's music down to him since childhood, and how emotional she had been at the thought of witnessing this farewell together. Others had come from as far as Austria, drawn by a devotion that transcended borders, language, and decades, proving that Bonnie Tyler's reach extended far beyond the valleys and coastlines of her native Wales. Floral tributes had already begun piling outside her home on Mumbles Road, silent testaments to a life that touched millions who never even met her but felt somehow that they knew her intimately through every note she ever sang. Behind the outpouring of grief lay a story that had unfolded with painful suddenness, one that fans were only now beginning to fully process as the reality of her absence set in. Bonnie Tyler, born Gaynor Hopkins in the small town of Swansea, back in June of 1951, had built her identity from humble beginnings, growing up in a council house before a chance discovery in a Swansea club changed the course of her life forever. She had once performed under the name Sharon Davis, adopted to avoid confusion with another Welsh singer of the time, and it was under that name, singing with her band in the Townsman Club in Swansea, that she was spotted by talent scout Roger Bell in 1975. He invited her to London to record a demo, and after months of uncertain waiting, a phone call from RCA Records changed everything, offering her a recording contract that would launch one of the most remarkable voices in British music history. That voice, raw and unmistakable, was often said to have been shaped by childhood surgery on her vocal cords, giving her the smoky, powerful rasp that no other singer of her generation could replicate. From there, her rise was nothing short of remarkable. Her early hit, It's a Heartache, released in 1977, introduced the world to her unmistakable vocal power, climbing to number 4 on the UK singles chart and reaching number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in America, eventually selling more than 6 million copies worldwide. But it was 1983's Total Eclipse of the Heart, written and produced by the legendary Jim Steinman for her album Faster Than the Speed of Night, that turned her into a true global phenomenon, topping the charts on both sides of the Atlantic and cementing her as one of Britain's most iconic musical exports. The song's dramatic, sweeping production and Tyler's raw emotional delivery made it an instant classic, one that would go on to define not just her career but an entire era of pop music, still filling dance floors and karaoke nights more than 40 years later. For decades afterward, Bonnie remained a beloved figure, especially in her native Wales, where she never truly left despite her international fame, splitting her time between Portugal and the Swansea coastline she cherished deeply. She often spoke fondly of Mumbles and the Gower Coast as the place that always called her home, describing the pull of her Welsh roots as something she could never fully leave behind no matter how far her career took her. Even in her 70s, she continued performing, telling those close to her that retirement was never part of her plans, insisting she was still enjoying every moment of the ride her music had taken her on. But behind the public image of the woman still performing, still smiling, still promising she had no plans to slow down, there had been a quieter struggle unfolding away from the stage lights. Tyler had endured a serious health battle in the months leading up to her death, having been placed in an induced coma following emergency intestinal surgery, a frightening ordeal that left fans anxiously hopping and praying for her recovery. For a while, it seemed as though she might pull through, as she so often had throughout a career defined by resilience, grit, and an unshakable determination to keep singing no matter what life threw at her. But on July 8th in a hospital in Portugal at the age of 75, Bonnie Tyler passed away, leaving behind her husband of more than 50 years, Robert Sullivan, and a legacy that stretched across generations and continents. The news sent shockwaves through the music world and beyond, with tributes pouring in from fans, fellow artists, and admirers who had grown up with her songs woven into the soundtrack of their most important life moments: weddings, breakups, road trips, and quiet nights alone. Now, weeks later, as her coffin finally returned to the streets she once walked as a young girl chasing an impossible dream, the true scale of what she meant to people became impossible to ignore. This was not simply the farewell of a celebrity, it was the farewell of a woman who represented Wales itself, who carried her accent, her roots, and her heart with her no matter how far fame took her, and who never once seemed to forget where she came from. As the procession moved through Mumbles, mourners lined not just the main roads but stood quietly outside her home, some clutching photographs, others simply standing in silence, unable to find words adequate for the moment unfolding in front of them. The atmosphere was heavy with a strange and powerful mixture of sorrow and gratitude, sorrow for the woman they had lost far too soon, and gratitude for the decades of music, memories, and moments she had given so freely to the world. Newton Road itself had to be closed from its junction near the White Rose all the way to Langland Road near Oystermouth School, a necessary measure to accommodate the sheer number of people determined to be there in person, to witness this moment with their own eyes rather than simply reading about it later. Plans for the following days revealed just how deeply the community intended to honor her, extending the tribute far beyond a single afternoon of mourning. An unofficial tribute was set to take place at Oystermouth Castle, where local musicians and singers would gather to perform her greatest hits in a heartfelt, free public gathering, a celebration meant to reflect the joy she brought into so many lives even amid the grief of her passing. Then, on Monday the 17th of August, the formal service would take place at St. Mary's Church, now known as Swansea Minster, in the heart of the city, a service reserved for family, friends, and invited guests only, but one that the wider public would still be able to witness from a distance as her coffin made its way through the streets both before and after. From there, at approximately 1:20 in the afternoon, her final journey would carry her through Skewen, the very village where her story began more than 7 decades earlier, completing a poetic and deeply symbolic return to her roots before a private family committal brought her public farewell to a close. A funeral notice released on behalf of her family painted a portrait of a woman remembered not just for her extraordinary talent, but for her warmth and generosity, someone whose music continued to fill dance floors, karaoke nights, and quiet car rides decades after it was first recorded, touching lives she would never even know about. Fans had been asked, in true reflection of who she was, to consider donating to the charities she had long supported rather than sending flowers, a final request that spoke volumes about the kind of person she had been away from the spotlight, someone who cared as deeply about giving back as she did about the music that made her famous. As the streets of Swansea filled once more with those wishing to say goodbye, it became clear that Bonnie Tyler's story was not simply ending. It was being honored in exactly the way she would have wanted, surrounded by the voices of the people who loved her, echoing the very song that once told the world exactly how she made them feel. Strangers who had never met one another stood shoulder to shoulder, united by nothing more than a shared devotion to a voice that had shaped their lives in ways both big and small, swapping stories of the first time they heard Total Eclipse of the Heart on the radio, or the wedding where Holding Out for a Hero filled the dance floor, or the long drives where her music kept them company through difficult times. For many, this was more than a funeral procession. It was a final chance to give something back to a woman who had given them so much without ever asking for anything in return. And as that final chorus faded into the sea air along the Gower coast, carried away on the same salt breeze that Bonnie herself had loved for so many years, one truth remained unmistakably clear. Though her voice had gone silent, the echo of Bonnie Tyler would never truly fade from the hearts of those she touched, and Swansea, the city that shaped her, would carry her memory forward for generations to come.